Hello and welcome to another Tuesday Talk with Ruby Reese. My name is Killian. I'm co-founder at Ruby Reese and at dognutrition.ie, and I'll also be your host for this podcast. This week we're talking about an incredibly important topic. We're going to be talking all about dog laws in Ireland. Now, this legislative part of our community is so important because it has the ability to shape how our community looks and every single aspect of dog ownership. During this episode, I will speak about dog ownership quite a lot because that is how dogs are seen in the eyes of the law. I, of course, mean guardianship and all the other fun words too. Really important topic, and I'm so happy and proud of these three people for coming on and chatting publicly all about this and for all the incredible work that they're doing, because it is a huge topic to take on, and also it's worthwhile knowing that by the time we bring out this episode, maybe even changes will already have occurred. That's something that we definitely, all four of us that we're chatting during this podcast episode, have hoped. So we, this information will hopefully become outdated, as time moves on and we improve our dog laws in the country of Ireland. So without further ado, I now want to introduce the conversation that I had with Dog Law Ireland. Hello ladies, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having us, Killian.
Delighted to have you here. Would you kindly introduce yourselves and maybe Dog Law Ireland as well to anyone that mightn't know you yet?
Yeah, okay, so I will start. I'm Demi. So I'm the extremely proud dog mom of a 6-year-old border collie called Klaus, and we rescued him from Cara Rescue Dogs back in 2019. In my day job, I'm actually an investment funds solicitor, so it's slightly different to dog law. But in my spare time, I'm really passionate about using my law degree and my legal skills to better the lives of animals in Ireland. And specifically, I'm most passionate about helping dogs, which is why I set up Dog Law Ireland alongside Hannah and Carrie. Just to mention, as a further side project, I also set up the Animal Law Network Ireland with another colleague last year, and that's a networking group for legal professionals and academics with an interest in animal law in Ireland. So that's me.
Amazing. You're keeping yourself busy.
Yeah, a little bit.
My name is Hannah Unger and I am a public and regulatory law solicitor in Field Fisher. I lead a pro bono team in work which is purely dedicated to improving the lives of dogs in Ireland. I also have a rescue dog called Twinkle, adopted from Dogs Angels Ireland, and before Twinkle I used to foster, and now I just do short-term fosters from time to time.
Amazing. Also kept very busy.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Carrie. So I'm a media tech and data lawyer. So very like the girls, quite different from this. So I got into animal welfare because I volunteer at a dog shelter very near me quite regularly. So that's where I got my own one of my own rescue dogs. I have two. We have a Springer. We got her from another rescue like 11 years ago. And then I got Zag this year. So I took him from Dog's Aid. And yeah, so I just seeing it firsthand and kind of, the backdrop of things that are going on kind of inspired me to get involved with the two lovely ladies here and see what we can do to make the country a better place for dogs.
Amazing. So we've got great goals. We've got lots going on. Very busy people. I can't even imagine having a full-time job and a Springer. So you're all
now, but she's simmering a bit.
Okay, yeah, okay. She's getting to the kind of quieter years, which is always helpful. So maybe I just want to touch a little bit on why was Dog Law Ireland formed, and maybe what even are some of your goals for the moment that are currently going on and the kind of current months and years.
Yeah, so we formed in August last year. It's coming up to our year anniversary, which is very exciting. Last summer, the government announced their plans to ban the XL bully type dog, and that really concerned us. People were panicked. They didn't know what was going to happen with their dogs, and it just really seemed like people needed help and just understanding with dog laws more generally. Demi actually came up with the great name, Dog Law Ireland, DLE for short, which means law in Irish. That. And we set up a social media page, and we started posting informational videos and posts on things like the XL bully ban, Ireland's dog crisis, dog breeding reforms, the greyhound racing industry, and things like that. And we've had a great response from people so far. People are really engaged, and it all went from there, I suppose. And then in terms of the achievements this past year, we're really proud that we were able to offer pro bono support to the legal team who took the judicial review to challenge the XL bully ban. We submitted a number of open letters to government ministers on the XL bully ban, surgical artificial insemination of greyhounds, things like that. We prepared a pledge ahead of the general election for general election candidates to sign. We were also engaging with TDs and senators throughout the year to discuss proposals for private members' bills aimed at improving dog law. We also held 2 charity events throughout the year, which raised about €17,000 for dog rescues. So we're really delighted to have been able to do that. In terms of plans for the future, we just really want to get as many people engaged in this area as possible. We want the system to work better, whether that's down to dog breeding, dog control, responsible dog ownership, and we want to be key to that education piece. And we want to work with the relevant stakeholders and government to make that happen.
Wow, there's so much there to unpack. Do you guys ever sleep? Like those are serious goals, serious topics, ones that so many of us really care about. There's so many industry professionals that listen into this podcast regularly. Everyone understands, the gravity of each one of these situations. You mentioned so many different kind of projects, basically, that you're working on, and so many things going on. So yeah, congratulations, and I'm so happy to be able to talk about loads of these different areas. So maybe, do we want to talk a little bit about the status quo in Ireland? What is the current state of legislation regarding dogs and dog welfare? And is there much even happening at the moment?
Yeah, so essentially there's 3 main pieces of legislation relating to dogs in Ireland. And, the main issue with all of them is a lack of enforcement, but they are also outdated. So all 3 acts have been listed as being under review in the government's legislative programme. So the Dog Breeding Establishments Act was on there since autumn 2020. The Control of Dogs Act was on there since autumn 2023. And then the Animal Health and Welfare Act was on the legislative programme since spring 2024. Now, what we don't know is how much progress has been made in the background on these reviews. But then, disappointingly, in the most recent legislative programme this summer, the Dog Breeding Establishments Act and the Control of Dogs Act have completely disappeared from that list without any explanation. There's also 2 relevant bills going through the legislative process. So one of them aims to reduce the number of dog attacks on livestock by introducing certain additional dog control measures. And then the other bill proposes 2 things. So firstly, to link the dog licence and microchipping systems. That's something people have been calling for years. And secondly, it would also allow dogs seized under the Animal Health and Welfare Act to be rehomed before the outcome of the relevant court case. So right now, that's only possible if ownership is relinquished by the person being prosecuted. The changes in that bill are quite non-controversial. And as we understand it, the bill has cross-party support. But even still, that piece of legislation has been going through the legislative process since it was initiated back in May 2022. So it's very slow. We're also waiting for draft legislation banning shock collars. That ban was announced back in May 2024, but we still don't have any concrete timeline for when the draft legislation can be expected. Something which Carrie will discuss in more detail later is, we're also hoping for a bill banning surgical artificial insemination in dogs. And, I suppose as lawyers, we completely understand that the legislative process is slow. But it's very frustrating when the regulations for the XL bully ban could be drafted and enacted within, I think, about 2.5 months of that ban being announced. So, I know that those regulations and the subsequent judicial review, they are a reminder as to why legislation shouldn't be reactive. It shouldn't be rushed. But it is also evidence that certain legislation can be progressed quickly if it's prioritised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something that I think everyone in the dog community would really welcome is seeing more legislation and more kind of updated legislation that's really going to make differences across the community. So yeah, I think definitely needs to be a bit more priority put on some pieces of these. I'm also interested to hear that that kind of rules around livestock and protecting livestock have come quite high up on the bills, given that I haven't heard of it being an absolutely massive problem. There's plenty of other problems going on around the country that it's interesting to see. I suppose with our agricultural background in Ireland, there's always going to be a little bit of a focus on that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see what's prioritised and what might not be. And talking about the legal system, because I know a lot of us, myself absolutely included, are not very well versed in how legal systems work and what stakeholders are involved. Do you mind maybe letting us know who are the main stakeholders in creating new legislation and pushing legislation forward? And might there be a need for some of these parties to coordinate a little bit better?
Yeah, so I think the main players here are pretty broad. It's obviously not just government. You've got local authorities, enforcement bodies, dog rescues, vets, behaviourists, all of them play a role. The problem is they're just not always working together in a joined up way. So I'd say there obviously, there is a need for better coordination. We were really encouraged when we saw the establishment of the dog control stakeholder group that was set up in 2024, and it brings together people from key government departments and interest groups, for example, the ISPCA, the An Garda Síochána, Veterinary Ireland, etc. And they meet every few months to talk through issues and make recommendations on dog control policy. So that's obviously a really good step. But unfortunately, it's only an advisory group. So even if they spend months discussing something, the government doesn't have to take their advice. An example of this was the XL bully ban. The group had several meetings about it, and there wasn't clear agreement that the ban would actually improve public safety, but the minister went ahead with the ban anyway. Ideally, what we'd love to see is the creation of an independent regulator, a body with real authority to oversee dog breeding and dog control. In South Australia, they've got something called a regulator called the Dog and Cat Board, and that's a great model. The Dog and Cat Board is responsible for overseeing local authorities who license breeders. They set policies, they educate the public, they publish annual reports and strategic directions and things like that. They have a wide remit. If Ireland had something like that, it could really help bring everything under one roof. You'd have a central body making sure everyone's on the same page, sharing data, enforcing the rules consistently, making decisions based on evidence and expert input. And it would be a really big step forward from the fragmented system that we have now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant idea. It's just as an opinion. I think, Irish people also love their pets as a whole. Dogs and cats mean so much to us, even ponies, horses, goats. I mean, it all kind of comes into it. We do love pets. And I just justified the fact that we prioritise livestock legislation because of our agricultural background in this country. So I think potentially an idea like this forming a group that has a real sway in legislation around pets would also be very, very fitting to the country that we're in. So yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned rescues as well. So you've obviously been in touch with a number of rescues recently and been working with them. What are we seeing the situation at the moment? I know we've had updates on this podcast a couple of times, but I haven't in the last kind of weeks and months. So how is the situation looking at the moment?
Yeah, so honestly, the situation for rescues in Ireland right now it's at a breaking point. We've spoken to, like you just said, a number of rescues over the last couple of months, and the same things keep coming up again and again. They are absolutely overwhelmed. I can say this from my own very minimal experience volunteering up in Dogs Aid. We see surrender requests nearly every day. So more stray dogs are coming through the doors, and it's a really worrying increase in dogs being abandoned. Sometimes they're literally being tied at the gates of the shelter or left in parks. It's completely heartbreaking, and it's not isolated anymore. This is happening across the country, and it's not just from small rural rescues, it's large urban operations as well. So what's really difficult is that a lot of these rescue organisations are run by volunteers or have very small teams. They're not state funded in any significant way, so they're relying heavily on donations, fundraising events, and honestly sheer willpower. So these resources are being completely stretched at the limit. So some are even having to pause or to turn away people because they just simply don't have capacity. And when a rescue centre says no, the dog often ends up in a pound where time and resources are also very limited, or worse, they're being completely abandoned. And I can't even talk about the alternative.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not forget the emotional toll that this is having on people working in rescues. They're not just dealing with logistics, they're dealing with trauma. Dogs that have been neglected, abused, or dumped because they got too big, too loud, too inconvenient, and they're trying to find homes for long stay dogs who've been overlooked again and again. We have a dog in Dog's Age. She's been there for 3 years of her life. Her name is Molly. She's a gorgeous lurcher. And they're also left hand feeding litters of puppies because that should have been bred in the first place. Like, it's honestly exhausting. So we're seeing rescues picking up the slack from the wider system, the fallout from irresponsible breeding, the failure to enforce existing dog laws, and the lack of support for struggling dog owners. They're absorbing all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And while the public often sees rescues as heroes, and they shouldn't be expected to carry the weight of Ireland's broken dog welfare system. So they need support, they need policy change, and they need people to understand that while rescue, it's not a backup plan, it's a lifeline. And right now that lifeline, it's honestly fraying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it makes so much sense what you're saying, you know, around policy and legislation and the approach that you're taking as a group, you know. It resonates across the country in all the rescues, because we're never going to be able to rescue ourselves out of every problem. You know, it's just not going to happen. And I think we do need changes, societal, legislative, etc., to take place before we can get this lifeline back up and running like the lifeline that it is, like you're saying, you know. And it's just so important. And I think the difficult thing to keep hearing month after month and year after year, because it's at least 2 years now since all the rescues have said, you know, we're now full, we're now at breaking point. We've always been in a bad place, but it's now just really you know, breaking point. So it's really heartbreaking to hear that that's still the situation and that it's not getting any better. So I totally appreciate the fact that we need to kind of broaden the picture and look towards, you know, all the other changes that need to happen to maybe lighten that load as well. We also mentioned something earlier that I think affects the rescues in a particular way, and that was you know, legislation that was in and around breed specific legislation. You also mentioned, I think, that it was due to be reviewed. Was it have we reviewed the bully ban legislation? Are there signs that it has had any positive or negative effect in our community? And where would we like to see it going, maybe, is my big concern here.
Yeah, so the judicial review that was taken against the original XL bully ban regulations has now concluded. So in response to that, the government did enact a set of amending regulations. We don't believe that they meet the concerns of the judicial review, which is what we understood was the intention. The one thing that the amending regulations have done is that they've provided an appeals process for privately owned dogs. So it's not the appeals process we would have hoped for, but it is at least better than not having an appeals process. I do sometimes wonder if many people really took the time to fully understand what the XL bully ban regulations actually provided for. So regardless of whether you're an XL bully advocate or if you believe that the breed should be banned, you know, that particular piece of legislation is extremely concerning. You know, what it does is it criminalizes owning a type of dog. That means you can be prosecuted, you can be fined, you can be put in prison, and you can have your dog euthanized if you break the law. But it then made it practically impossible to understand whether you were breaking the law by providing this really vague and subjective standard by which to identify whether you even had the type of dog that was covered by the law. It tasked dog wardens with applying the legislation, but then the government didn't effectively train them how to do that. And to make matters even worse, it didn't provide for any appeals process originally. You know, I think if that legislation related to a different type of dog or a different subject matter entirely, people would have been horrified, and, you know, rightly so. The other thing that the government seemed really focused on was aligning us with the UK and Northern Ireland in implementing the ban. but then they didn't actually, go and follow the established processes that they have in place in those jurisdictions. So things are actually now a lot worse off for dogs and dog owners in the Republic of Ireland. As far as we know, there is still no one in Ireland who is adequately trained to type dogs. We still have no effective appeals mechanism through the courts. And in the Republic of Ireland, in contrast to the UK, not every dog found to be a banned dog has the opportunity to get an exemption. But then we're still also no better off in terms of public safety. The UK have had breed bans in place since 1991, and the situation is just getting worse. And we've no reason to believe that's going to be any different here. I think in terms then of assessing whether it's working here from a public safety standpoint, I don't even know that we really have enough data from before the ban to be able to properly compare. So, for example, local authorities only started actually compiling the reports that they get about aggressive behaviour or dog attacks on people in 2022. And we don't know if that information was considered by the government when they implemented the ban, let alone whether they saw any relevant Garda data or hospital data. The one thing that we can say for certain is that the effect of this legislation and the fact that the appeals process doesn't extend to dogs without owners is causing incredible hardship for rescues who are frequently dealing with dogs being incorrectly classified by dog wardens. And, much like Carrie's points, it's honestly heartbreaking to see that play out and to see dogs with no known behaviour issues, being euthanized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's it's definitely very, very concerning. And I think in and around breed-specific legislation as a whole, I understand there's a whole philosophical debate there on whether it makes sense or not. But we have other older breed-specific legislation as well, like the restricted breeds lists, and people might question whether those lists make sense, whether all of these breeds need to be restricted or on that list, or whether that legislation matches the modern world. Might there be space to revisit that legislation as well in the future?
I think we definitely believe that we need to. I suppose just for people that maybe aren't aware, the restricted breed list is a list of dog breeds that are subject to additional control measures when they're in public. So they have to be muzzled, they have to be kept on a leash of maximum 2 meters length, and they have to be controlled by a person over 16. Spot the lawyers there, these are your legal obligations. One of my pet peeves about the restricted breed list is that it was brought in by way of statutory instrument, meaning that there was no government debate on it at the time. So essentially, we don't have any publicly available information that tells us how those specific breeds ended up being included on the list. But, I suppose, as you say, into that, bigger question, the bigger issue is that breed-specific legislation doesn't appear to be effective in enhancing public safety. And, I don't propose going into them, but I think the UK statistics alone have shown that. And believe it or not, it wasn't that long ago that the same department that imposed the XL bully ban were talking about a move away from even having a restricted breed list. So back in 2019, the Department of Rural and Community Development carried out a public consultation on the measures relating to the control of dogs in Ireland, and subsequently issued a report with their findings, which was just back in 2022. And really positively, that report was heavily focused on responsible dog ownership. And it even discussed the potential for removing the restricted breed list once those measures around responsible dog ownership were put in place and working effectively for a period of time. So the imposition of a breed ban was a significant move away from, their own internal findings in the space of just 2 years. And we absolutely agree that measures needed to be taken following the number of horrific attacks that happened across the country. But we're now quite concerned that the government believe that they've solved the issue when we're actually not better off in terms of public safety or dog welfare. And that worry is based on the fact that statistics from the UK haven't shown a decrease in dog attacks following the imposition of breed bans. I think as to whether this will be revisited again in the future, we really would have hoped that this would have been one of the main purposes of the dog control stakeholder group, who've been tasked with looking at dog breeding and dog control. But I think, as Hannah mentioned, when the decision about the XL bully ban was made, we know that it was done without any meaningful input from that group. So even if they make really brilliant, promising recommendations, it's hard to know whether they'll be implemented or have any impact. I do think it's going to fall to non-governmental organisations to really push for effective dog control measures that enhance public safety and ensure dog welfare. But I think that's something we can be hopeful about. Like, we have some incredible people and incredible organisations that are dedicated to advocating for that effective change. And I really do believe that a strong start was made with the charities who took the judicial review against the XL bully regulations and the people who were involved in that review. There's also some really great work going on in the UK on this. So they're way ahead of us because they've had breed bans since 1991. But that slightly works to our advantage because we've actually found that there's so many people in the UK who are genuinely willing to help however they can. So I think, we have to remain hopeful and just keep doing our best to help however we can as well.
Mm-hmm. And I really like the approach of looking to see what has worked abroad. I mean, I've lived and worked in Germany as well for and been a dog owner, I suppose, in the eyes of the law, or a dog guardian, and things work differently in different countries, and I think it's okay for us to put on our big boy and big girl shoes and say, let's look to see where things have worked positively for other countries. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't do that anyway here most of the time. So we might as well look to examples that truly make a difference. Yeah. And I think you kind of mentioned a point as well when speaking about the breed specific legislation that kind of hits home, because you mentioned your obligations as a dog owner with breed specific, or with specific breeds that are on the list. You don't see all of them wearing muzzles out. You don't see that being enforced, and I think that's the tip of the iceberg. That's probably the most visible of our legislation not being enforced when it comes to dogs, and then there's the rest of the iceberg that we're not even seeing, but presuming that not everything is being enforced, or potentially mightn't even be possible to enforce, or people might feel bad about enforcing it because they don't necessarily believe that every Rhodesian Ridgeback needs to have a muzzle on a walk. So I think it's just really, really interesting to see that, that you can see it every day. You walk out in any street in Ireland and you can see these laws clearly being broken, and a lot of people being okay with that. We briefly interrupt this podcast to bring you a message from our dear sponsors, ourselves at dognutrition.ie. If you feel your dog's diet is not optimised for them, you can sign up for a free discovery call on our website. This is an opportunity for you to provide us some details of where your dog is at right now, and we can see if we're the right professionals to help you on your journey. After this call, you can make an informed decision about moving forward to a consultation with dognutrition.ie. Thank you for your attention. Now we will get back to the podcast.
Yeah.
When it comes to breeding, then, we mentioned breeding as well already. So, and I think the point about the surgical artificial insemination was also mentioned. This is something I believe is already banned for all breeds except for greyhounds. Should we be looking at this as a welfare priority, and one of the things that maybe we should be looking at kind of changing the legislation on first and foremost?
Yeah, so I get a bit emotional about this one because I do have a sighthound. So so this is one of those issues that, like, it seems quite technical on the surface, but it actually goes right to the heart of animal welfare ethics in Ireland. So at the moment, like you just said, surgical artificial insemination, which is an invasive, often painful procedure, it's banned in all dog breeds except for one, the greyhounds. Mm-hmm. And that exception has been in place for a long time. It's never really been publicly justified in a transparent way anyway, but it's commonly understood that that exemption exists to support the racing and breeding industries. Now, the key thing here is that this procedure isn't used for medical reasons in most cases. It's used to maximise breeding potential, to inseminate a dog who might not be otherwise able to mate naturally, or to preserve particular bloodlines. Now, this may sound harmless to some, but it is a surgical procedure. It involves general anaesthetic, which none of us really like going under. It carries real health risks and pain, and under animal welfare law, we are meant to avoid any unnecessary suffering. So why is this still legal for greyhounds? Would it be considered unethical in any other breed? The question is that we don't have an answer. Sorry, the question we don't have an answer yet, and we've been asking this for years. So in 2024, the Department of Agriculture actually opened a public consultation on this issue. It was a really important moment because it was the first time the public had a chance to formally weigh in on whether this exemption should remain. But here's the frustrating part. It's nearly been over a year and we're still waiting for a response. The department has not issued any kind of update, despite a number of PQEs, and Chris Andrews has been brilliant raising it. So no report, no policy change, and no timeline. So this delay sends a very clear message that when it comes to greyhounds and their welfare, we're still willing to look the other way, and that's just not acceptable. So the truth is we need consistency in our animal welfare laws. If we say that surgical AI is too invasive and too unnecessary for Jack Russells and Labradors and Collies, then it should also be invasive and unnecessary for greyhounds unless there is a clear veterinary reason. Profit or tradition should never override welfare, and that's exactly what's happening here. So yes, sorry, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, it should be a priority to remove this exemption for greyhounds. And beyond that, we need to be holding our institutions to account when consultations go ignored, because the public has spoken on this and it's time the policy caught up, or at least get its answer.
Yeah, and I really, really appreciate all of the colour that you've added to that as well, because I think it's important for us all to understand, outside, I think people almost shy away from speaking about legislation because it might seem dry or might seem inaccessible. But I think once you start seeing the examples behind it, the relevance of it, the emotional impact for owners, guardians, whatever you want to term them, I think then it becomes relevant to all of our lives, and we see kind of how important it is and why this needs to be prioritized. So actually, I don't think it was too much background at all. I love hearing the background, and I'm sure anyone listening and will really, really appreciate kind of getting that bit as well. And talking about breeding in general then, do we need maybe a complete overhaul of legislation around breeding in this country?
I would say we absolutely do, yes. The current system just isn't working. Dog breeding in Ireland, unfortunately, has just turned into a sort of fast fashion industry. There's huge demand for designer breeds, and unfortunately the laws we have in place are just too weak, or else they're just not enforced properly. And that's created a situation where not all, but many breeders put profit ahead of animal welfare. And the system that we have just allows that to happen. Ireland has also become a major exporter of puppies to other countries. There was a brilliant article by John Mooney, the Sunday Times journalist, who recently highlighted the scale of this trade, this export trade. So I definitely recommend your listeners to check that out. As I mentioned at the start of the podcast, I work in Field Fisher, and I lead a pro bono team in work. And last year, myself and my colleagues published a paper outlining key reforms to dog breeding in Ireland that we think are urgently needed. And we actually presented that report in the AB room of the Oireachtas, thanks to MEP Lynn Boylan, who's been an amazing animal welfare advocate over the years, and she helped organise that. Before I'll outline some of the reforms, but before I get into them, I might just explain for your listeners the three types of dog breeders that we have in Ireland. So there's operators of dog breeding establishments. These are licensed breeders who have 6 or more female dogs capable of breeding on their premises, and they have to register with their local council. Then we have registered sellers. These are people who sell or supply 6 or more dogs in a calendar year, and they have to register with the Department of Agriculture. And that can include backyard breeders or people who are selling on behalf of larger breeders. And then we have private sellers. That's anyone who sells or supplies 5 or less dogs in a year. They don't have to register at all. Mm-hmm. So the Field Fisher paper focuses on reforms for the first two groups, the dog breeding operators of dog breeding establishments and registered sellers. And I'll just touch on some of the important reforms when it comes to dog breeding establishments, just because of the sheer scale of that breeding. So the paper suggests that that there's a cap on the number of breeding females that a breeder can have. Right now, the largest breeder in Ireland is licensed for 300 breeding females, and that doesn't include the number of puppies or stud dogs that are present on that premises. We also want to see age limits introduced. Currently, you can breed a dog from just 6 months old, which is far too young, and there's no retirement age either. We think inspections need to happen more often, and there's huge variation when it comes when you look at the different councils and how often they're inspecting premises. Some are carrying out no inspections at all throughout the year, while others are. And most shockingly, the most recent government statistics available show that Cavan County Council, which has 2 separate dog breeding establishments licensed for 300 breeding females and 100 breeding females, carried out no inspections in 2023, which is just shocking. So we think there should be a minimum number of inspections set out in law. And transparency is a big issue too. Local authorities don't have to publish their inspection reports, so the public really have no idea, what's going on behind closed doors. And we also think fines need to be increased, especially considering how profitable the industry is. Right now, the current penalties just aren't acting as a sufficient deterrent. And we'd also like to see the dog breeding establishment guidelines, which cover really important things like housing, exercise, socialization, veterinary checks, etc. We want to see a mandatory element to them. At the moment, they're just guidelines or recommendations, and there's no consequences if anyone ignores them. There's also other important reforms set out in the Field Fisher paper. I don't have time to go into all of them, but they relate to improving rules around microchipping, incentivizing neutering, to control the dog population. And as I mentioned earlier, setting up an independent regulator to oversee everything, would be hugely helpful. And we're actually working with TD Jennifer Whitmore to turn these proposals set out in the paper into a private member's bill. So we're really excited about that, and she will be bringing that forward soon.
That is amazing. And there's that was incredible amount of information there. 300 dogs is still blowing my mind away. Like 300 breeding dogs. I knew someone once that had 16 dogs. And went on 2 pack walks in the morning and 2 pack walks in the evening, because she could only manage about 8 dogs at a time, and had quite a lot of land and everything like that, and a lake nearby. Like that was serious amount of work, so 300 dogs, if you're to give them a sort of lifestyle where they get, say, absolute bare minimum for an adult dog, say a 20-minute stroll once a day, you'd be saying we'll be scratching the bottom of the barrel. That's a lot when you've got 300 dogs. Like, they either are not getting that, or they've got a huge team of people that can cater to dealing with that many dogs. You also mentioned about microchipping. As far as I'm aware, we don't have any clue how many dogs we have in this country, do we? Because we've got licenses which to some people seem almost optional, and it's only guesstimates, really, isn't it, how many dogs we even have in the whole country?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I would also love to see, microchipping coming in a more meaningful way, licensing coming in a more meaningful way, and also even potentially connecting the licensing a cheap, like there's certain parts of Germany, for example, that they kind of refund the first year of licensing when you go and do a course. So it's about responsible breeding course. It's nothing to do with dog training. It's to do with dog ownership. And if you go and do a course, it's a couple of evenings with I think it's with a kind of a local council certified trainer. You get your first year for free of your dog license. That's amazing, because it also, it gets you updated on what your responsibilities are as a dog owner, and also gives you kind of like a little community of new puppy owners that all want the best for their dogs as well when you're starting off. So it's like win-win-win, and all those dogs are then registered for free, basically, as well, and you automatically have kind of have statistics on how dogs are doing in a nation. So I think it's really, really interesting.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, and encouraging as well, because it always seems that anything that comes through legislation comes at a cost, and it's a cost to you. Whereas if you're getting something for free or getting something back or included, it's kind of showing how we all want to do this together. It has benefits for everyone.
It's about incentivizing people.
Absolutely. You mentioned as well, I think in notes when we were chatting before, maybe it was on your website, about the Nature Watch dog breeding map. How could this make a difference?
Yeah, so the dog breeding map is an initiative of the Nature Watch Foundation. So they're a UK based charity. They run a series of fantastic campaigns, and one of those is a campaign against puppy farming, which is headed up by Natalie Harney. So the extension of the dog breeding map to the Republic of Ireland is something that we were really happy to be able to support. The aim of it is to make dog breeding more transparent. It allows people to find out more about licensed breeding in particular local authority areas. And so sourcing this information in the Republic of Ireland isn't particularly easy because, as Hannah mentioned, we have different types of breeders. So we actually have two separate registers. We've one for dog breeding establishments, and then we've a separate one for registered sellers. And while the registered sellers list is actually kept fairly up to date, the same can't unfortunately be said for the dog breeding establishments register. So Nature Watch haven't actually relied on the registers to create the dog breeding map. They've gone and submitted individual freedom of information requests to each local authority to collate the information. And they do this on an ongoing basis to make sure it's kept up to date. So as of now, it's up to date as of January this year. And I think, like you've touched on, we don't have data. So even that collation of up-to-date data is key. And it's something we just don't have a lot of when it comes to dogs in Ireland, generally across the board. And so Nature Watch have then taken this data and created this really easy to use interactive map of the UK and Ireland, whereby you can click on each local authority and it tells you how many licensed dog breeding establishments there are, how many registered sellers there are, and also how many dogs they're licensed and registered for. They've also gone and produced an excellent report with the information that they collated, and some of the statistics and findings in relation to the Republic of Ireland, they're actually really difficult to read, but I think it's important that people hear them and are aware of them. And I think, as you listen to them, it's always important to bear in mind that they relate only to licensed dog breeding. So it doesn't cover unlicensed or unregistered sellers at all. So Nature Watch found that in the Republic of Ireland, as at that date in January, we had 93 licensed dog breeding establishments, 721 pet sellers registered to sell dogs, and that overall we had almost 3,000 female dogs kept for licensed breeding. They found that Irish dog breeders keep a disproportionately high number of breeding females, that dog breeders in the Republic of Ireland are more likely to operate on a larger scale, and that the 4 largest licensed dog breeders are all based on the island of Ireland. So 3 of them are in Northern Ireland, and then the one in Cavan that Hannah mentioned previously. And I think, you have to kind of question, like you said, that number 300 is shocking. How can that ever be acceptable? But particularly in the middle of a dog welfare crisis, how can any local authority justify that number? And I think resources like the dog breeding map can really help to raise awareness. And, we're hopeful that that awareness can then spark some change.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like you say, it's incredibly large numbers from some of these breeders that it's difficult to fathom how do you even feed that many dogs? And that's not even considering that they might be having 1 or more litters of puppies per year. Like that's a lot of puppies to look after. That's a lot of dogs to look after. It's a lot of mouths to feed and a lot of hopefully exercise to be given. So it's they're really, really big numbers, and I can totally see how a map would make sense there. We mentioned as well when we were talking about the breed specific legislation, the responsibilities of dog owners, but for the rest of us that don't have a dog on this list, what are our responsibilities as dog owners at the moment, and could changes maybe potentially be made to legislation to help reduce some of the neglect and abandonment of dogs that's unfortunately seen in Ireland?
Yeah, I think this is honestly such an important question because I think a lot of people genuinely don't know what's legally expected of them when it comes to being a dog owner in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about loving your dog or meaning well. There are real legal responsibilities designed to protect your dogs, their owners, and the wider community. So let's start with some basic legal requirements every dog owner should be following in Ireland. First of all, your dog should be microchipped, and not just chipped, but also registered on an approved database like Fido. So this includes keeping your contact details up to date. If your phone number or your address changes, the database isn't updated, the chip is basically useless in an emergency. So you're also required to have a dog license under Irish law. So this can be an annual license, which I just do to get it done, or I get the once off one, sorry, or the once off lifetime license. And it may seem like a formality, but it really helps fund local authorities or dog control services. So in public, your dog must wear a collar or a harness with your name and address on it. And if your dog gets loose, which is everyone's worst nightmare, someone can contact you directly. You're legally required to keep your dog under effective control at all times, especially in public places. So that means not letting them chase joggers or other dogs and making sure they come back when they're called. So because if your dog causes any harm or distress, you're liable. So I have a sight hound, so he has a high prey drive. So he's on a lead pretty much all the time unless he's in an area where I can call him back. And let's not forget the one that everyone doesn't want to talk about or kind of overlooks. Picking up your dog is actually a legal requirement under the Litter Pollution Act. Any bin, any bag, there's no excuse. So they're the basics. But even with these laws in place, we're still seeing high levels of abandonment and neglect and irresponsible ownership. So I think it's time now to look at how legislation could be improved, and not to punish people when things go wrong, but to prevent these situations in the first place. So one idea, and we talked about it, you talked about it, Killian, in Germany, is the course. So I think one idea that's been suggested, and I personally think it makes a lot of sense, is linking a basic dog ownership course to the dog license system. So in order to get your dog license, you need to complete a really short online or in-person course that covers the essential things like your microchipping, your legal requirements, welfare standards, and behaviour basics. And maybe that course doesn't happen once. So maybe we build in a requirement that this needs to be renewed every 10 years, or just do a refresher course to keep owners up to date. So it would be kind of similar to how we think about first aid. So something you refresh over time, you don't just learn once and forget. And it's not about being punitive, that's not the point, but it's more about setting people up for success and making sure that everyone who owns a dog is operating with some baseline knowledge. Because neglect and abandonment, they don't come from cruelty. They don't always come from cruelty, sorry. Sometimes they come from confusion, misinformation, or just being unprepared. And that's where education, backed by legislation, can make a real difference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
No,
I was going to say, I think people want to learn about what their responsibilities are. It's like you say, it's not about punishing people. It's I think people are curious to know what's expected of them and what's to be expected of others as well. I think a lot of people don't know, and I think maybe they might feel a little bit more empowered if they did know what their legal obligations were and what others are expected to do as well.
No, 100%.
So, yeah. I cut across you. Did you want to say something else as well on that point?
No, I just said, yeah. So we do need stronger enforcement and to build in these, to build this in. So we set people up for success from the start. So yeah, I do think a short welfare course tied to the dog license system would be brilliant. And I think more people would be on board, because at the end of the day, like the dog doesn't choose us, we choose them a lot of the time. So we want to set them up for success for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And even something in that course, like letting people know that there's a support system in place. I think people forget that there is a dog community. I think people feel like they're isolated on an island and don't have a network. And the more you start to look, I mean, I know so many trainers, behaviorists, vets, physiotherapists, and I think most of the island of Ireland doesn't even know that canine physiotherapists exist, so it's amazing just once you start to see that there's a community and a support kind of system there, that then it makes everything an awful lot easier for a lot of people, I think.
Definitely.
And talking about community, as a dog community, what can we as dog owners, dog guardians do to help make effective change?
Yeah, so this question really gives me some hope, because while policy change and legislation implementation can be slow, and that can be frustrating, real momentum often starts at community level with people like us who care and people who want to do better for dogs in Ireland. So we can lead by example. So owning responsibly, making sure our own dogs are chipped, vaccinated, neutered where necessary, and well trained. Not supporting puppy farms, which means never buying from someone who won't let you see the mother or advertises dog-like products. I'm going to plug Hannah's paper here and say read it. It's brilliant. It's really helpful in understanding this, because I know it gave me a lot of background. So choosing to adopt where possible and supporting ethical vetted breeders when adoption isn't an option. But it's more than just what we do at home. It's about using our voices. So it's writing to TDs about legislative change, whether that's around breeding, ownership, enforcement, or funding for rescues, or even just asking their own animal welfare policies. challenging harmful myths that, certain breeds are dangerous by nature or that dogs are just bad when they've actually just been failed by humans. Supporting local rescues, whether that's through volunteering, fostering, fundraising, or just sharing their posts. Like, you never know who will see that post on your own network.
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe most importantly is, like we just said there, is like we need to build a culture of care. A dog loving community isn't just one that posts, the cute photos or, buys toys to the dogs. It actually looks out for dogs in distress, educates others, and demands accountability from systems that affect them. So real change is, of course, possible, and it will only happen, though, if we work together, because no matter how much we love our own dogs individually, the biggest impact happens when we come together and say, this isn't good enough, we can do better, and we will do better.
Absolutely. And I think the community as a whole is hungry for this as well. I think people love coming together. Irish people love banding together and making things happen. So I think it's just about getting these things started and pushing them in the right direction. So talking about the future outlook now, what's coming next for Dog Law Ireland and what can people get excited about?
Yeah, so we have lots of exciting plans on the horizon. As I mentioned earlier, we're working on turning the reforms set out in the Field Fisher dog breeding paper into a draft private members bill, and this will be brought forward by Jennifer Whitmore, TD. We're also working closely with the brilliant Senator Chris Andrews, who has established a dog welfare society in the Dáil, and we plan to provide a briefing to them later this year. We're preparing for upcoming webinars and conferences for organisations like the Lynx Group and the Irish Veterinary Behaviour Association. And we want to continue with our informational videos on social media, and we want to get people engaged in this area. There's endless things to do. Demi has an amazing spreadsheet with all the tabs and all the lists. And it's an endless list of things to do. But we're really, like, we'd love people to get in touch with us, legal or non-legal. And if we've got our email, we'll plug that at the end. If people do want to get in touch, we'd love to hear from them.
Absolutely. We will put all the links to useful resources that we agree on afterwards into the show notes for everyone to find. So your website and any kind of resources that you want to share with people, we'll have all those detailed, as well as, of course, your social media handles and the rest of it as well, so people can stay up to date. We will absolutely do that. What was I going to say? How would the average person on the street, I count myself as an average person on the street, I would like to take action now. What would you say is the most effective thing that I can do? I'm sitting here thinking, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know how the legislative system works, but I would like to help, the causes that you are proposing. And if I write to my TD, will they listen? Your average person probably hasn't written to their TD. Maybe they mightn't even know the names of their local TDs. Where does one start with these things, and how can people maybe gain a little bit of confidence to take steps forward locally?
I certainly think attending protests is a good way to start.
100%.
Make your voice known, turn up. It's so important. When they're organised, it's like we attended the XL Bully protest, which was organised by Brenda in WAG Rescue, and like there was a brilliant turnout for that. We were speaking at it, Senator Chris Andrews spoke at it. There was amazing speakers, and it was a great turnout from people. I just think we marched over to the Dáil, and I think make your voices heard as much as possible for stuff that you're passionate about. Sorry, Demi, I interrupted. I just thought.
No. I do as well. Like, to your point, Killian, I don't think we can underestimate the importance of reaching out to our elected representatives. I think that more often than not, they are more receptive than you might think they'll be. And, particularly, I'm sorry, Carrie, I don't want to take from, I know, this is your topic and something you really care about as well as us, but the thing with surgical artificial insemination is that every time it's raised in parliamentary question, or I suppose more in the Seanad and the Dáil, we see the TDs that are there respond to it by saying, I didn't even know this was a thing. So more often than not, elected representatives, they're covering so much, sometimes they don't even know what the issues are. And I don't think you can underestimate just reaching out and asking the question or sharing your views. I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think also keeping in touch with your rescues and making sure you're following all their pages. They always have really helpful information up, and you know, even if you can't adopt, and if you can't foster, if you can't volunteer, you know, sharing their information actually really helps. I know a lot of rescues are very passionate about the bully ban and greyhounds in general, because you know they seem to be the forgotten souls of rescue sometimes. And I think speaking up for their little voices because they don't have them is actually really important as well. So following your local rescue pages, and I know some people, I find it hard to follow those pages because they don't want to look at the dogs who need homes. But if we all had that attitude, they'd never get home. So I think it's very good to, you know, help in what you can, even if it's sharing a post. Because I don't think I think a lot of people don't know, and it's not people being malicious. They sometimes just don't know what's going on. And I know a few of my friends are absolutely horrified when they saw the picture of the poor dog that was recently put up from Kildare Rescue, you know, not from Kildare Rescue, but they shared the photos and they saw it and they were all devastated. They don't know that kind of stuff is going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's really good advice, I think, from all three of you. You know, like number one, going to the protests, you always get such a number one, you get to know other people's stories and their backgrounds, and it just adds an extra bit of color to each of these topics that are going on. I think totally with your local TDs and everything. I'm lucky enough to know some of our local representatives here in Cork, and you know, you're right. Sometimes they do care about the same things that you do. It's just it mightn't be on the very top of their agenda, or it might be you know, that they haven't heard your angle on that specific topic, and it's like the penny drops once you start talking to them. And absolutely as well, like social media, if it's free and it's easy for us to go and follow a page and give them a like every now and then and give them a little share and just try and, you know, get more active and see if they're running events then that maybe you might be interested in going to as well. That is amazing. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming on. Like I promised, does one of you want to mention your website, maybe, in case someone's just listening in and doesn't have they might be driving at the time, mightn't have access to the show notes. What's your website again?
It's at doglawireland.ie. And we were so lucky. Claire Lally, I just want to plug her, who you know, helped us so much in putting the website together. We're so grateful. She adopted Eddie No Eyes from the DSPCA, and we love her.
Oh, amazing. That's brilliant. So if anyone's audio only, they don't have to go back. They know that they can go to doglawireland.ie to find you, and then everything else will be in the show notes as well if people want to come back. Thank you so much, all three of you, for coming on. You've also been the first trio that we've had on the podcast, so absolutely delighted that you kept the flow of conversation going. It was so brilliant to speak to you all, and I'll be back begging you to come on again at some point in the future. Thanks a million for coming on.
Thanks for having us,
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you, Killian.
Thank you. Speak to you again, hopefully very, very soon.
Bye.
We'd love to come back.
And once again, a huge thank you to the three ladies from Dog Law Ireland for coming on and sharing such valuable information with us on the podcast episode this week. Of course, as always, you'll be able to find their website and links and their social media handles in the show notes wherever you're watching this podcast, alongside, of course, our own links to dognutrition.ie and to Ruby Reese, where you can find out more about us and support all of us in what we get up to in the dog community. Thank you very much for listening in. If you know someone that might be interested in listening into this podcast episode themselves and might gain something from it, please do forward it on, share it out to your social media platforms and to your community. We'd be more than happy to get this information out to as many people as we possibly can. Have a lovely week, and we will be back to you very, very soon with another episode.